Welcome back to The Great Conspiracy, the 9/11 news special you never saw. The events of 9/11 begin with aircraft going wildly off course. Incredibly, despite radar tracking for almost 2 hours, the whole of the mighty U.S. Air Force goes AWOL that morning. It's a mind-bending anomaly. Not a single U.S. Air Force interceptor turns a wheel until it's too late. There are no jets at all. It's a matter of historical record. That could happen only two ways. Either it was staggering multiple simultaneous coincidental incompetence at all levels in many agencies defying known laws of averages, a 54 million to 1 chance, which is the 9/11 Commission official story. There's another explanation. The U.S. Air Force is neutralized by design. The evidence indicates this is about a 1-to-1 chance. Standard procedures for dealing with aviation emergencies of all kinds have been in place and have worked for years. David Ray Griffin is the author of The New Pearl Harbor, the most widely respected critique of the official story of 9/11. He quotes the Federal Aviation Authority's Aeronautical Information Manual, Official Guide to Basic Flight Information and Air Traffic Control, ATC, procedures. It states, if you are in doubt that a situation constitutes an emergency or potential emergency, handle it as though it were an emergency. As for the military, the guiding document is ACC 113-SAOC, Volume 3, U.S. Air Defense Command and Control Operations. At the top of the first page, it reads, compliance with this order is mandatory. The first paragraph reads, in part, the ADC, Air Defense Command, is to provide North American Aerospace Defense Command with the means to detect, monitor, identify, intercept, report, and if necessary, destroy any airborne object that may pose a threat to North America in the fulfillment of the Tactical Threat Warning Attack Assessment and to provide such information to collateral missions of NORAD. Michael Rupert, a former Los Angeles Police Department detective, was the first major 9/11 skeptic and researcher in the world and remains one of the foremost. He was one of 40 experts on 9/11 who testified at the 6-day International Citizens Inquiry into 9/11, held in Toronto in May of 2004. I helped organize that event. At the inquiry, Michael Rupert addresses the absence of jet interceptors, but the unlikelihood of a simple stand-down order, and asks,
what if they were so confused and had been so deliberately confused that they couldn't respond?
Michael Rupert is standing by at his office in Sherman Oaks, California. Michael, thanks for this. What is the reason for the failure of U.S. military jets to show up in a timely fashion on 9/11?
Well, the simple fact is, Barrie, that they didn't know where to go. The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place, one of which Northern Vigilance had pulled a significant number of North American fighter aircraft into Canada and Western Alaska and Northern Alaska in a mock Cold War hijack exercise. There was another drill, Vigilant Guardian, which was a hijack exercise, a command post exercise, but it involved the insertion of false radar blips onto radar screens in the Northeast Air Defense Sector. In addition, we have a confirmation, thanks to General Richard Myers, who was acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who told Richard Clark, as reported in Clark's book, that there was another exercise, Vigilant Warrior, which was, in fact, according to a NORAD source, a live-fly hijack drill being conducted at the same time. With only 8 available fighter aircraft, and they have to be dispatched in pairs, they were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
But this was done deliberately, though.
Apparently so, and I will be saying that in my forthcoming book, Crossing the Rubicon, 9/11 and the Decline of American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil. We have done an extensive investigation on that to show that these war game exercises were apparently very well planned by someone who I will show, I believe, was Dick Cheney in the United States government, to deliberately confuse FAA, NORAD, and U.S. Air Force fighter response to fulfill a prophecy that another man had once said, let one happen and stop the rest.
On that very point, we have a recording.
Hi, Boston Center, Team U. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
Now, the 9/11 Commission didn't mention the war games, is that right?
No, in their final report they did mention, I think in one paragraph, Vigilant Guardian, but the response given by NORAD Commanding General Ralph Eberhart and other Air Force spokespeople was absolutely nonsensical, and it made no mention of any of the other war game exercises. Eberhart's position was, in fact, which is a very ludicrous position, that the Vigilant Guardian exercise, leaving aside the others, actually helped speed response on 9/11, and that is absolutely not the case.
How does this relate to the 9/11 Commission report, which says that planes had gone in the wrong directions?
Well, that's a separate issue, and that remains to be clarified. But what I will be disclosing in my book, in effect, is that there were two simultaneously operating command and control systems functioning on the day of 9/11, and at some times they were issuing conflicting orders. We do not have a clear explanation for why fighters from Andrews Air Force Base were sent out over the sea first and couldn't turn around because the 9/11 Commission seemed to change all the evidence just arbitrarily right before it issued its final report. So we don't have a clear explanation, but certainly there was, it is all consistent with a motive that said make sure that the fighters don't get to any place in time to stop the three critical attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon.
I have called that in my own research an effective stand down. Would you say that would be a correct characterization?
Well, it is a de facto stand down. That was the intended result. I would really call it an intended paralysis. With only 8 available fighters, and fighters have to be scrambled in pairs, you only had a chance for 4 responses out of what we have confirmed were as many as 22 possible hijacks showing up on radar screens.
That is fascinating and damning information. I look forward to your book. What about the motivation for the whole of 9/11?
Well, overall, the primary motivation was something we call peak oil, the fact that the world has either passed or is at now its permanent peak of hydrocarbon or oil production, and now about to go into a condition of permanent and irrevocable decline in oil production, even as demand is soaring exponentially, both in the West and in China, Asia, and the developing countries. This has set off what we, from the wilderness, and certainly in my book, we will describe as a very bitter sequence of conflicts, as Dick Cheney told us in the war, that will not end in our lifetimes, to secure the last remaining oil reserves on the planet. We've seen a lot of other instances where this kind of attack was predicted and stated as a requirement for the American empire to mobilize its military resources. Zbigniew Brzezinski did in his book, The Grand Chessboard, in 1997. The Project for a New American Century called for a new Pearl Harbor in 1992. So there is, there's a lot of evidence here showing very clearly that this attack was needed. It was planned, and all of the evidence that has been so diligently compiled has just been absolutely ignored by the Keene Commission.
And finally, Michael, I certainly, for one, accept your motive of peak oil. What about other motives that could be involved?
Well, if you are going to, as Zbigniew Brzezinski wrote, he said some kind of direct external threat, an attack like Pearl Harbor. Basically, he said you have to scare the bejesus out of the American people to get them to support the, quote, imperial mobilization, those were his words, necessary to secure these vital resources in these strategic geopolitical regions on the planet. Without that, the American people would never have gone for it. And, of course, now in late 2004, we are beginning to see that the American people aren't going along with it now either.
Michael, thank you for this today.
Bye-bye, Barrie.